The Massacre at the Fort of Sheikh Tabarsi. Chapter 14. Muhammad Shah was dead. The new ruler was 17-year-old Nasreddin Shah. Haji Mirza Agassi was toppled from power and replaced by the new Prime Minister Mirza Taqi Khan. The young king was even less friendly than his father. The new Prime Minister was more iron-hearted in his rule, and his hatred for the Bab was more implacable than that of Haji Mirza Agassi. He unchained a combined assault by the civil and religious powers against the Bab and his leading disciples. He was determined not to make the same mistake the former Prime Minister had made in waiting too long. The news of the Bab's triumph over his examiners at Tabriz spread rapidly throughout Persia. It awakened a new zeal in the hearts of his supporters, who redoubled their efforts to spread his teachings. It enkindled a corresponding reaction among his enemies. Encouraged by the new Prime Minister, persecutions, unprecedented in their violence, swept over the nation, engulfing the staunchest of the Bab's followers. This brief but triumphant period may well be the bloodiest and most dramatic in the rise of the new religion. No story of the life of the Bab would be complete unless it told about his disciples, the letters of the living, who sacrificed everything in life, proving their love and devotion for his cause. Some preceded the Bab in death, some followed shortly after. Almost every one of his chief followers was struck down during this raging period of persecution. Qudus was imprisoned in the town of Sari, and Mullah Hussein set out to rescue him. A messenger had come from the Bab to Mullah Hussein, bearing the Bab's turban. "Adorn your head with my green turban, the emblem of my lineage," the message said, "and with the black standard unfurled before you, hasten to, and lend your assistance to, my beloved Qudus." Mullah Hussein immediately left Mashhad in the eastern province of Khorasan and headed for Sari in the northern province of Mazandaran. His small party marched under a black banner which Mullah Hussein raised up so that all who wished to join him would know that he and his companions were followers of the Bab. That emblem waved continuously over his small band for 11 months. It summoned all who gazed upon it to renounce the world and embrace the cause of God. Black was the color of the standard that, according to the Prophet Muhammad, would herald the arrival of the Promised One. Mullah Hussein and his party arrived at a junction on the high road to Mazandaran. They camped under the shadow of a big tree by a running stream for a few days. "We stand at the parting of the ways," he told his companions. "We shall await his decree as to which direction we should take." One day a fierce gale rose up and struck down a large branch from the tree. Mullah Hussein observed, "The tree of the sovereignty of Muhammad Shah has, by the will of God, been uprooted and hurled to the ground." On the third day after he had made that prediction, a messenger arrived from Tehran reporting the death of the king. The next day Mullah Hussein and his companions decided to leave for Mazandaran. Pointing towards Mazandaran, Mullah Hussein said, "This is the way that leads to our Karbala," alluding to the tragic martyrdom of the Imam Hussein in AD 680 at Karbala in Iraq. "Whoever is unprepared for the great trials that lie before us, let him now repair to his home and give up the journey." Several times Mullah Hussein repeated that warning. Then he declared, "I, together with 72 of my companions, shall suffer death for the sake of the well-beloved. Whoso is unable to renounce the world, let him now at this very moment depart, for later he will be unable to escape." 20 of his companions chose to turn back, feeling unable to withstand the trials to which Mullah Hussein alluded. The others continued the journey towards the town of Baha'i, now known as Babul. The news of their coming alarmed the Sayyid Ulama, the chief religious leader of that city. Nicholas says in his history that all the clerics of Baha'i were exasperated with the followers of the Bab because of the many conversions that Qudus had brought about in their city, as many as 300 in 1 week. The Sayyid Ulama told the town crier to summon all the people to the mosque at once, so that he could deliver an important sermon. When an immense throng had gathered, the Sayyid Ulama ascended the pulpit. He flung his turban to the ground, tore open the neck of his shirt, and angrily began to incite the people against Mullah Hussein and his party. "Awake," he cried, "for our enemies stand at our very doors, ready to wipe out all that we cherish as pure and holy in Islam. It is the duty of the inhabitants of Baha'i, both young and old, both men and women, to arm themselves against this contemptible wreckers of Islam. Tomorrow at the hour of dawn, let all of you arise and march out to exterminate their forces." The entire congregation arose in response to this appeal and made every preparation for the dawn, arming themselves with every weapon they could find or devise. The next morning, immediately after offering his morning prayers, Mullah Hussein called his companions together and told them to abandon all of their possessions. "Leave behind all your belongings," he urged them, "and content yourselves only with your steeds and swords, that all may witness your renunciation of all earthly things, and may realize that this little band of God's chosen companions has no desire to safeguard its own property, much less to covet the property of others." Instantly all obeyed. They unburdened their horses without a word. A prominent merchant who had joined the band had brought with him a satchel full of turquoise, which was undoubtedly his most treasured possession. Yet, at a word from Mullah Hussein, he was the first to cast aside his satchel as an example to the others. He hurled it at the side of the road without a backward glance. A short distance outside of Baha'i, Mullah Hussein and his companions encountered a multitude of people who blocked their way. In the face of the uproar from this angry populace, some of the companions began to unsheath their swords. "Not yet," Mullah Hussein told them. Not until the aggressor forces us to protect ourselves must our swords leave our scabbards." The mob, armed with guns, swords, axes, scythes, spades, and any other weapon they could create, moved forward toward that small group and met them on the road about 3 or 4 miles outside the city. They had set out from Baha'i at the break of day, determined to meet and slay Mullah Hussein's party and plunder their possessions. The Sayyid Ulama had retreated to the safety of his home after inciting the others to attack. This was but one of a series of similar onslaughts that were taking place throughout the country, all encouraged by the Prime Minister Mirza Taqi Khan. The following historical report indicates the gravity of the situation. The minister, with the utmost arbitrariness, without receiving any instructions or asking permission, sent forth commands in all directions to punish and chastise the Babis. Governors and magistrates sought a pretext for amassing wealth, and officials a means of acquiring profits. Celebrated doctors of religion from the summits of their pulpits incited men to make general onslaught. The powers of the religious and civil law linked hands and strove to eradicate and destroy this people. This was to be the first of 3 occasions on which followers of the Bab withdrew to a chosen retreat, erected defences, and defied further pursuit. They would fight for their lives with determined skill and strength, but they would not attack. Even in the midst of a fierce conflict, they would not drive home an advantage or strike an unnecessary blow. E.G. Browne, in his Year Among the Persians, writes that on one of these occasions even the women took part, and when their shelter was attacked, like the Carthaginian women of old, they cut off their long hair and bound it around their makeshift weapons to afford them the necessary support. The desperate resistance offered by the Babis must therefore, he says, be attributed less to the strength of the position which they occupied than to the extraordinary valor with which they defended themselves. Separated as they were from the Bab, their imprisoned leader, his followers did not yet understand his clear teaching on the matter of physical violence and warfare. Therefore they followed after the pattern of their previous religious teachings. Do not attack, but defend. In the book A Traveller's Narrative, Abdu'l-Baha states, in towns where these Babis were but a limited number, all of them with bound hands became food for the sword, while in cities where they were numerous, they arose in self-defense in accordance with their former beliefs, since it was impossible for them to make inquiry as to their duty. His followers had not yet read the Bab's statement that the slaying of a soul is outside the religion of God, and if anyone commands it, he is not and has not been of the Bayan, and no sin can be greater for him than this. The mob poured down on Mullah Hussein and his companions and opened fire as they neared. 6 of the defenseless party were struck down by that first blast. Mullah Hussein's companions pleaded with him. "Beloved leader," one of them exclaimed, "we have risen and followed you with no desire except to sacrifice ourselves in the path of the cause we have embraced. Allow us, we pray you, to defend ourselves and suffer not to fall so disgracefully a victim to the fire of the enemy." "The time is not yet come," Mullah Hussein replied. A bullet struck another companion in the chest and killed him instantly. This companion was a man of humble and loving disposition. His devotion to the Bab was deep and sincere. He had walked on foot beside Mullah Hussein all the way from Khorasan. At the sight of this much-loved companion fallen dead at his feet, Mullah Hussein could no longer remain silent. "Behold, O God, my God, the plight of thy chosen companions, and witness the welcome which these people have accorded thy loved ones. Thou knowest that we cherish no other desire than to guide them to the way of truth, and to confer upon them the knowledge of thy revelation. Thou hast thyself commanded us to defend our lives against the assaults of the enemy. Faithful to thy command, I now arise with my companions to resist the attack which they have launched against us." Unsheathing his sword, Mullah Hussein spurred on his horse and pursued the person who had slain his companion. His opponent took refuge behind a small tree, afraid to face him. He held his musket in front of his body to shield himself as Mullah Hussein swept down upon him, and with a single sweeping stroke of his sword cut through the trunk of the tree, the barrel of the musket, and the body of his opponent. This astonishing feat struck terror into the hearts of that unruly mob. Thus, on the plain of Barfarouche, the words the Bab had spoken to Mullah Hussein at Markub began to come true. Your days of horsemanship are yet to come. You are destined to exhibit such courage, such skill and heroism as shall eclipse the mightiest deeds of the heroes of old. The historian Nicholas states that pain and anger redoubled the strength of Mullah Hussein, who with one single blow